You can't tell me nothing. Can nobody tell me nothing? That's the culture of disrespect in a nutshell. You can't tell me nothing. If you can't tell me nothing, why go to church? Why go to school? You can't tell me nothing.
Howdy, folks. Welcome back to the podcast. Katie and I thoroughly enjoyed conducting this interview with Dr. Sax, and we're excited to be able to share it with you all. We recently read his book, The Collapse of Parenting, and so we talk primarily about this book. He has written some other books, which we will link below, and he mentions a couple of them briefly in this interview. Before I give you a quick bio on Dr. Sax, I am going to ask that if you are listening to our podcast on Spotify or iTunes, or really if you're listening to our podcast on any platform, if you're able to leave a rating or a review, we would really appreciate that. That really helps our podcast. And if you watch our podcast on YouTube, if you're able to hit the like button or subscribe to our channel, that also helps our podcast as well. So just please do that if you are able to do that. That's what I'm asking. Now let me read a bit of a bio from Dr. Sax, and then we'll dive into this interview. Dr. Leonard Sax MD PhD graduated from MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts in the fall of 1977 at the age... Oh, no, sorry. I messed this up already. Okay, hold on. I'm reading the wrong line here. Dr. Leonard Sax MD PhD graduated from MIT in the year 1980 at the age of 19. He then went on to the University of Pennsylvania, where he earned both a PhD in psychology and an MD. He has continuously been certified by the American Board of Family Medicine since 1989. Dr. Sax speaks on the issues of childhood and adolescent development, not only in the U.S., but around the world. And he has been featured on The Today Show, CNN, National Public Radio, PBS, Fox News, Fox Business, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, the British Broadcasting Corporation, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, New Zealand Television, and many other national and international media outlets. I tell you what, I could keep reading because there's a bunch of other things, including the fact that this book became a New York Times bestseller. That's another fun thing to say. You'll hear more about him in today's interview, so I'm just going to let you do that. Enjoy.
The Now That We're a Family podcast.
Well, Dr. Sax, thank you so much thank you so much for taking the time, I should say, to speak with us today. Katie and I have both thoroughly enjoyed your book, The Collapse of Parenting, which we're going to hopefully get into. I'm curious, that title is to me, it's a bit dramatic, and so I'm wondering, what in your mind is the collapse of parenting? And maybe more specifically, you speak early on in this book about this culture of disrespect. And I'm wondering if you just kind of could iterate that on some level to our audience and what you see the problem in parenting being right now.
Wow. Okay. So I wrote the first edition of The Collapse of Parenting back in 2015, and the publisher asked me to write a new edition. So the new edition begins with a mom brought her daughter into the office. I'm a family doctor. And mom explained her 6-year-old daughter, has a fever and a sore throat. Okay. All right. So that's a story. So I say, okay, time to take a look. Would you please open your mouth and say, ah? My daughter shakes her head, no. And I said, okay, mom, looks like I'm going to need your help here. Would you please ask your daughter to open wide and say, ah? And mom said, her body, her choice. Okay, my body, my choice, longtime slogan of the abortion rights community, more recently adopted by activists opposed to COVID-19 vaccines. Mom is using that slogan to defend her daughter's refusal to allow me, the physician, to look at her daughter's throat when she's sick. That's an extreme example of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the collapse of parenting, a parent who thinks it's actually virtuous to let kids decide. That's an extreme example of the collapse of parenting. A more common example of what I mean by the collapse of parenting, another example from my own practice, boys not paying attention in school. The parents, the teachers have filled out these Connors scales. Okay, so this is a standard form that's used across the United States, rating how inattentive the kid is. Well, this kid is off the chart. in every class. He's not paying attention. Parents take him to the child psychiatrist. Child psychiatrist looks at the counter scale and says, well, it looks like he's got ADHD. Let's try Vyvanse, see if it helps. Vyvanse is tremendously helpful. But now, taking Vyvanse, this kid has palpitations, he's jittery, he has no appetite, and parents go online, they find an article I wrote for the New York Times, an article I wrote for Time Magazine talking about the dangers of these medications. So they bring him to me for a second opinion. And I do a more careful sleep history. I say, does your son get plenty of sleep? And mom says, oh, he gets plenty of sleep. We make sure he's in bedroom 9 o'clock at night every night, and we wake him up 6 a.m. the next morning. That's 9 hours. That's enough. So I say to the boy, do you have a video game console in your bedroom? Yeah, of course. Doesn't everybody? Say, were you playing last night? Yeah, of course. Wasn't everybody? What were you playing? RDR2. Oh, excellent game. When did you finish? 1:30, 2. Mom's like, you were playing video games last night at 2 o'clock? Is that pretty typical? Yeah, it's pretty typical. So this boy is staying up till 1:30, 2 o'clock most nights, he's telling us, playing video games, getting to bed at 1, 2 in the morning, trying to wake up at 6. He's getting 4 or 5 hours of sleep at night. He is sleep deprived. Sleep deprivation perfectly mimics ADHD of the inattentive variety. There is no Connor scale. There is no Vanderbilt interview that can distinguish between ADHD, true ADHD, and sleep deprivation. The medication the psychiatrist prescribed, Vyvanse, Adderall, tremendously helpful. Hang on. The Vyvanse, the Adderall, tremendously helpful. Why? They're amphetamines. They compensate for the sleep deprivation. But the appropriate remedy for sleep deprivation is sleep, not Schedule II amphetamines. So I said to mom, okay, you gotta get the video game console out of the bedroom. No video game console in the bedroom. That's my recommendation. That's the guidelines of the American Academy of Pediatrics. No video games. You got to lock down video games no more than 40 minutes a night playing video games. And mom says, oh, I couldn't do that. He'd totally flip out. And this is a 12-year-old boy and a parent who is uncomfortable exercising authority. And that's very common. That is super common. And that's another example of what I mean by the collapse of parenting. Parents who are uncomfortable exercising authority, parents who are unsure of their authority, parents who don't feel that they can exercise authority over their 12-year-old. And the result is girls in their bedroom scrolling through Instagram at midnight and boys in their bedroom playing video games past midnight. That's super common, and that's a big part of what I mean by the collapse of parenting. But you asked about the culture of disrespect. So let me explain what I mean by that. So again, an example from my own practice. Mom says to me regarding her 8-year-old son, she says, I don't understand where this language is coming from. He's so defiant. He's so disrespectful. His father and I never talk like this. I don't know where he's getting it from. I said, does he watch Disney? Does he watch Nickelodeon, Nick Jr.? And she said, well, of course. I said, lock it down. Lock it down. No more Disney. I'm not saying he can't watch TV. I mean, nothing wrong with the Home and Garden TV. But no more Disney, no more Nickelodeon, no more Nick Jr. And 3 weeks later, mom called me and she said, it stopped. It stopped. He was learning this from Disney, from Jessie, from Dog with a Blog, from Livin' and Maddie, from Bunked. These shows on the Disney Channel are teaching kids that it's cute and funny to be defiant, to be disrespectful. So it starts with the Disney Channel. It does not, that's just the beginning of what I'm talking about with the culture of disrespect. You look at the most popular songs, the Billboard Top 100, the most popular songs in the United States. Lil Nas X had an incredible hit. Song called Old Town Road was #1 in the United States, the most popular song in the United States for 12 consecutive weeks. He sings, you can't tell me nothing. Can't nobody tell me nothing. So last year, Bill Maher had a big bestseller, comedian. Bill Maher, big bestseller. In his bestseller, Bill Maher, the comedian, says, one of the basic truths about the human experience is that young people are beautiful but stupid. Old people are ugly, but more likely to be wise. So he continues that any successful human culture will have strong bonds between the generations so that the beautiful young people can learn something from the wise old people. You can't tell me nothing. Can't nobody tell me nothing. That's the culture of disrespect in a nutshell. You can't tell me nothing. If you can't tell me nothing, why go to church? Why go to school? You can't tell me nothing. Human culture works only if the young people are prepared to learn from the old people. I mean, what is childhood for? Literally. When you ask that to parents, and I do often when I speak to parents, they'll say, well, it's for, biological maturation. No, it's not. How do we know? A horse is a mature adult at 4 years of age, and a horse is a bigger animal than a human. The Kentucky Derby is raced with 3-year-olds. A 4-year-old child has barely begun. Humans spend more years developing, more years as children and adolescents than most animals live. Why? Well, we don't have to guess. We have scholars like Dr. Melvin Conner at Emory, who's devoted his career to studying this. He wrote this 800-page tome, The Evolution of Childhood, Oxford University Press, sharing his research, studying development in our species with development in other species, especially other primates, to answer the question, why so many years? Why does it take so long? And the answer he gives is that human development takes so long because it takes many years for the grown-ups to teach the kids what the kids need to know. You can't tell me nothing. Can nobody tell me nothing? I have an exegesis of Deuteronomy 6 in my book, The Collapse of Parenting. Teach them diligently to your children. Well, as I point out in the book, that's actually not what the Hebrew says. That Hebrew phrase, Vishinantam levanecha, the verb is not to teach. The verb shanem isn't to teach. It is to chisel in stone. So a better translation of that phrase would be chisel these laws, inscribe, incise these laws in the hearts of your children. And on the very next page, I quote a longtime columnist for the New York Times, Jennifer Finney Boylan, who wrote a column on enlightened parenting in which she asserts, and I'm quoting, enlightened parenting means setting your child free to discover for themselves their own right and wrong. And if in so doing your child becomes a stranger to you, then so be it. That may seem enlightened to some, to people who read the New York Times and listen to National Public Radio, but it's not enlightened. It is a dereliction of duty. If you set your child free to discover for themselves their own right and wrong, and they have a device with internet access, what they will discover is Lil Nas X and Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion and mainstream pornography. Because we live in a toxic culture. You have to incise the law on their hearts. You have to inscribe the law. That is biblical parenting. It's also evidence-based parenting. I have a presentation I do for churches and for schools. And I tell the host, we can call it evidence-based parenting or we can call it biblical parenting. Because it turns out that biblical parenting aligns with evidence-based parenting. Because good parenting is authoritative parenting, is both strict and loving. And that's the guidance you get from Scripture, and that's the guidance you get from the best scholarly research. It's not the guidance you get from the New York Times or from National Public Radio.
Yeah, when you mention that strict and loving parenting, so many people see them at odds. Mm-hmm. And I think, well, I can't be a loving parent if I'm a strict parent. And in your chapter on misconceptions, you talk about one of those misconceptions being, hey, well, if I'm strict with my kids and say I don't let them eat candy in our home, then as soon as they go into a candy store, they're going to rebound and they're just going to eat everything from top to bottom. And that's, one silly example, but there's so many things that I think as parents, we're scared to enforce things at home, because then we think, okay, when our kids hit high school, as soon as they're out from under our roof, then they're going to rebound. And so you talk about how this was a misconception. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely right. A lot of parents, they've watched Oprah or they've seen something on TV or on YouTube about kids rebounding. And this is where I think the research is so helpful. And there's a line in the book of Proverbs, raise up a child in the way they should go, and when they are old, they will not depart from it. Raise up a child in the way they should go, and when they graduate from high school and move off to college and move away 5 hours from home or 10 hours from home or 20 hours from home, you have improved the odds. There are no guarantees. But if you inculcate good habits while they're living under your roof, then when they move away and they're no longer under the roof, you have improved the odds. That's a true statement. If, on the other hand, you don't enforce the rules and you follow the guidance of the New York Times and let kids set kids loose to do whatever they want to do, and your son develops a habit of staying up past midnight every night playing video games, and your daughter develops a habit of scrolling through social media past midnight, what's the odds that when they go to university, they'll say, oh, well, now that I'm far away from home, I'll turn over a new leaf and I will behave more virtuously? The odds are not good. And we know this. This is not a guess. We have longitudinal cohort studies, which I cite in The Collapse of Parenting, where researchers have followed teenagers from junior high into high school and off to university and out of the home. And the authoritative parent who's setting the rules, when that kid goes off and leaves home 5-10 years down the road, is much more likely to be virtuous and self-controlled. Whereas the permissive parent who hasn't been enforcing the rules, that kid 5-10 years after leaving the home is much more likely to be addicted to drugs or alcohol and much more likely to be anxious or depressed. We know this, and this is why the research, I think, is so helpful in giving guidance to parents and encouraging parents to do the right thing. And that's really a big motivation I had for writing the book, is to encourage parents to do the right thing, to find the courage to say no when you have to.
Yeah, well, that is helpful to a parent because, as you mentioned numerous times in the book, there's a huge appeal to the emotions of a parent to let them discover themselves, or to be very kind and to be gentle. And of course, good parenting requires kindness, and it requires also strictness, as you've said. I'm curious, when you use this term conscientiousness being a prerequisite for health, wealth, and do you also say happiness? What do you, I mean, I know you talk about it in the book, but for the sake of just this interview, what do you mean by conscientiousness in our children?
So first of all, let's put that in context. So in that chapter, I asked the reader, what characteristic of a child measured at 12 years of age best predicts health, wealth, and happiness in that individual 20 years later? Again, referring to one of the big longitudinal cohort studies where they followed these kids, brought all these kids in at 12 years of age and measured their emotional stability, measured their self-control, got their grades at school, measured their friendliness. And yes, you can measure friendliness. You can quantify friendliness using multiple parameters, including talking to teachers and talking to classmates. Which one of these, and it's only one, powerfully and accurately predicts health and wealth and happiness 20 years down the road? Only one does. And when I ask parents, because I do these presentations, the most popular answer, the one that most parents raise their hands for, is emotional stability. But it's not emotional stability. It's not grades. It's not friendliness. It is self-control. Self-control being a very good measure of conscientiousness. Self-control and honesty are the two key measures of conscientiousness. So it follows from this that our first job as parents should be to teach our kids conscientiousness, to teach self-control and honesty to our kids. If we want our kids to be happy and healthy and successful as adults. So how do you teach self-control to a 12-year-old? Well, you say no dessert until you eat your vegetables. No games until all the chores are done and all the homework is done. And I encourage parents to do that. And if you haven't been doing that, sit your kids down and say, hey, we've been doing some things wrong. From now on, no dessert until you eat your vegetables. No games until all the chores are done and all the homework is done. And if that has not been the rule and you make that announcement, there will be an explosion. And the older the child, the louder and longer the explosion. But if both parents stand their ground, after 6 weeks, you will have a child with better self-control. Not after 1 week. The first week is often pretty tough. But after 6 weeks, if both parents stand their ground.
Yeah, I like how you bring up that both parent, because kids are so good at trying to navigate between parents and pit them
Setting one
against
parent
each other.
against the other. Yes.
Yeah. You speak specifically to teaching virtue and how it's different than teaching kids to be smart. And I think a lot of us have heard the concept of how to teach children to be smart, which is, affirming their identity.
Mindset.
Yes, exactly. Like, okay, not like you're smart, you're a hard worker, right? Mm-hmm. But you say how that's different when it comes to teaching virtue. So can you speak to that as well?
Yeah. So many of us have heard the gospel of Carol Dweck, which is that you don't praise a kid for being smart, you praise a kid for working hard. So if they get a good score on a test, you don't say, "Oh, you're so smart." You say, "Oh, you must have worked really hard." And with regard to cognitive achievement, there's good evidence in support of Carol Dweck's argument. But it turns out, in regard to virtue, the reverse seems to hold. When you're talking about virtue, you do want kids to think in terms of being virtuous. So, for example, when you're talking to kids about cheating on a test, a recent survey of American high school kids, in the same survey, in the same interview, they asked kids, "Do you cheat on tests?" And the majority of kids said, "Yes, I do." And they asked kids, "Are you a cheater?" And they said, "No, I'm not a cheater." So even though they admitted to cheating on a test, they didn't see themselves as cheaters. They distinguish between cheating on a test, but I cheat on a test, but I'm not a cheater. So, well, actually you are. If you cheat on a test, you are a cheater. That's just the way the world works. So you don't want to say, it's not enough not to cheat on a test. It's not enough to not be a cheater. You can't cheat on a test. You have to push kids to that higher standard. And how do you inculcate virtue? You have to inspire kids to want to be virtuous, and that's not an easy thing to do. I talk a lot about inspiring kids with role models and telling real stories of real people who really lived. Actually, not so much in The Collapse of Parenting, but in my books, Boys Adrift and Girls on the Edge. I talk about inspiring kids with stories of real men, real women who really lived, because we are a storytelling species. And the anthropologists tell us that human culture evolves when families sit around a campfire and tell stories. And there's lots of good evidence to support that. And they tell stories of people who really lived. And that's how you inspire kids, not with abstract notions of virtue, but with real stories of real people who really lived, who made difficult choices.
Mm. Well, in speaking to, I guess, affirming various aspects of our children's identity, you kind of contrast humility versus high self-esteem. And it was an intriguing thought process for us, because we probably, like a lot of parents, want our children to be confident. We want our kids to be able to have confidence, but we also want them to have humility and to be teachable when they're children and when they become young adults. Would you be able to kind of expand upon what you talked about in the book there?
Sure. So a Christian school asked me to do a homily, short little talk about a passage from Scripture for middle school kids. So I did Micah chapter 6, verse 8. Asot mishpat v'ahavet chesed v'hatznei lechet im elehecha. I explained to the kids, all right, Micah chapter 6, verse 8, the prophet is talking. What does the Lord require of you? You have to dot all the I's and cross all the T's? No. Here's what the Lord requires. Asot mishpat v'ahavat chesed v'hatznei lechet im Elohecha. To do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. So when I meet with the kids, it's always question and answer. It's not a PowerPoint. I said, so I said to the kids, what does that mean to walk humbly with your God? Humility. I said to the kids, raise your hand if you think you know what the word humility means, and you're prepared to share your definition with your colleagues here. So a boy raised his hand, and I called on him, and he said, humility means trying to convince yourself you're dumb when you know you're smart. I said, actually, that is not humility. That is psychosis. Okay, that's a detachment from reality. I said, try this on for size. Humility means being as interested in other people as you are in yourself. And the kids are all giving me a blank look. They have received no instruction in the virtue of humility. And this is a Christian school with verses from the Bible literally chiseled into the walls of the building. And yet they have received no instruction in humility. I don't blame the kids. How should they know if they have received no instruction? The parents often don't have a clue. I was speaking at another school about the virtue of humility. And during question and answer, Mom said, I don't want to teach my daughter to be humble. I want her to have high self-esteem. So when that big job opportunity comes along, she'll go for it. I don't want her to be humble. I said, Mom, with all due respect, you are confused. You're confusing being humble with being timid. Those are not the same thing. They're very nearly opposites. And the virtue you want for your daughter in that situation, when the big job opportunity comes along, the virtue you want for her is not high self-esteem. The virtue you want your daughter to have in that situation is courage. Courage means you know your inadequacies, your failures, your shortcomings, and you find the strength to push forward anyhow. The virtue of humility. There's a lot more about that, incidentally, in the new edition of the Collapse of Parenting, about not only chores, but the importance of chores in the early years. I'm talking 2, 3, 4 years of age, because many American parents, I would say most American parents, in my experience as a family doctor, they feel like, well, my kid's 2 years old. He's too young to help in the kitchen, obviously. So they set them in front of a screen, and that 2-year-old is watching SpongeBob SquarePants while the parent is making supper. Or they're, hopefully they're not watching a screen. They're playing a game. Hopefully they're playing an, Melissa and Doug toy or something. But they're playing at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years of age. And now at 8 years of age, parent says, "All right, you're old enough to help in the kitchen," and the kid's like, "I'm not doing that," because the kid has had 7 years of being told that my job is to play while parents make supper. That's the way the world works. That's not the way you want to do it. First of all, first point I make in that chapter on humility is the way you teach humility is chores. That's the foundational way you teach humility is chores. That's the way every successful family does it on the planet. And this is not a guess. We've got a great deal of research from other cultures. And 2-year-olds want to help. 2-year-olds really want to help. So how do you do this? Okay, beginning when your kid is 6 months old, you get a front-facing papoose, and you put your baby in your papoose, and you're going around the kitchen, and you're explaining what you're doing. Okay, now I'm getting the onions. I'm going to chop them up. I'm going to saute them. And now I'm getting the lettuce. I'm going to chop this up. You're explaining everything you're doing. And when your kid is 2 years old, you can get these stand-up thingies so the kid can stand next to you without falling over, and they can start ripping up the lettuce. And I share one of my own patients, Beth Faird, who was having her 2-year-old dust and rip up lettuce. They want to. At 2 years of age, kids want to help. And this is universally true of humans. You take advantage of that. And I cite a book which has pros and cons. It's called Hunt, Gather, Parent. And but she went to hunter-gatherer tribes in the Arctic and in Mexico and in sub-Saharan Africa. And these kids are helping, and they want to help because they know how to get kids to do chores starting at 2 years of age. We can do this. And I give examples from my own practice of families who do this. So there's a lot more about that in the new edition of The Collapse of Parenting. How you teach humility beginning at 2 years of age.
Yeah, and just that concept of the high self-esteem, pairing or being in opposition, I should say, you contrast that to humility, and you refer to it as bloated self-esteem. So, it's gone past a helpful point. And it was interesting because this is actually how we learned about your book. We were sitting around talking with some family members, and they had just read your book, and we were all talking about areas in our life where we'd maybe peaked too early. We thought we were really good at something as a kid. And then, a decade goes by and it hits us. Oh, we aren't really that good at that thing as an adult. And so how do we help our children not have that experience? So we tell them, hey, you're good at art, or you're good at music, you're good at these things. And then, they wake up and they're in college and they're like, I'm average at all this stuff.
When I speak at Christian schools, I often quote 1 Corinthians 4. And again, this is following Tim Keller's exegesis of 1 Corinthians 4. In 1 Corinthians 4, Paul is saying to the Corinthians, you know what? I don't really care what you think of me. I don't really care what I think of me. I don't judge myself. Don't think too much of yourself. Don't think too little of yourself. Think of yourself less. Spend less time thinking about yourself and spend more time thinking of others. And this is the great danger of social media. And this is another good reason why kids shouldn't be on social media, because social media is all about ranking yourself compared to others. How many likes do you have compared to others? How many followers do you have compared to others? And comparison is immensely toxic. And again, we know this. We have so much data on this now. And that, I think, is an important message of 1 Corinthians 4. You don't want to be doing that. You don't want to be comparing yourself to others. And how good am I at this compared to someone else is not really a helpful question. Can I improve? That's a much more helpful question. How can I improve? That's a helpful question. But am I better at this than somebody else is a less helpful question.
So maybe that comparison in the younger years is something that can set kids up to realize later that they didn't have that they weren't skilled in this area, or how could you encourage kids to grow in a skill set, I guess, that maybe they are skilled in, instead of just coasting, thinking they're just, on top. I
often meet with students, and I'm going to throw out some names that you guys are basically elderly because you are both over 30 years of age. So you may not even know who these people are. But when I meet with the kids, the teenagers, they all know who Ninja is. Okay, so Ninja is a young man who earns $400,000 a month playing video games. His real name is Tyler Blevins. And when I show his face on the screen, it's a PowerPoint, and the boys erupt, they explode. Every single boy knows who this guy is. The teachers have no idea who he is. All the boys know his name. They all want to be him. And then I show Charlie D'Amelio, and all the girls know who she is. And she has 20 million followers on TikTok. And last year, she earned $19 million. And she has 11 billion likes on TikTok, more than any human on the planet. And many, many, many girls want to be her. Not all girls, but many girls want to be her. And then I'll show them the numbers, which is that there are 9 million people professional gamers on Twitch, and all of them want to be the next Tyler Blevins. The odds are not good. The median number of followers of a gamer on Twitch is 6, which means that the average gamer on Twitch is playing for a few pennies, literally a few pennies per game. It's not likely to happen. The odds are literally about 200,000 to 1 against you making any kind of money on Twitch, and similar odds against you getting to any kind of fame or stardom. And I show the numbers and show the odds. I say to the kids, okay, you're a teenager. Your job, your task is to figure out what does God have in mind for you. I'm betting he doesn't want you to be the next Tyler Blevins, the next ninja, or the next Charlie D'Amelio. But you do have a unique gift. What is it? Are you called to be a great musician, a great athlete, a great leader of men? I don't know. You don't know. And you're not going to find out playing video games or scrolling through Instagram. You got to figure it out. This is your job. How you spend your free time is the most important decision you make each day, because that's when you're going to figure out what is your task, what is your vocation, what is your calling. You don't have that much time to figure it out. You need to start today. That's what I say to the kids when I meet with them at middle schools and high schools across the United States.
Yeah, and I also do think it illuminates the point that you've already made on how crucial it is for parents to introduce heroes to our children, and going back to storytelling, or having biographies in our home, because not only does it expand our children's horizon to things beyond video games and social media, because it's a big world out there with lots of really awesome pursuits that, God's made a very interesting world. And if you don't know about the artists, if you don't know about the inventors, if you don't know about the explorers that have gone on before us, then you don't even know what to pursue. And not only does it open their horizons to other pursuits, I think biographies, especially in telling the stories, give you a realistic perspective on the time it takes to achieve excellence, or to succeed in any field of value. And so I just wanted to highlight the value that I think storytelling plays in the home in regards to that topic as well.
Well, you speak to educating children's desires.
Yes.
And I think that's an interesting concept. I think parents, sometimes it's easy to just think, oh, well, our child's into this. They clearly desire this. And we see it kind of as like fixed in stone, instead of our desires can be changed. Not only our children's desires, but our desires. Before we close, could you speak to educating our kids' desires and how we can do that as parents?
Well, I think you've just made the key point, which is that many parents think that the desire is fixed. Well, and researchers find that what 13-year-old girls are in this country are most likely to want is social media, and what 13-year-old boys want is video games. And again, parents who listen to National Public Radio, they've been taught, validate your kids' feelings. So, if my daughter wants to be on Instagram, my son wants to play video games, I guess that's what I have to do. No, that's not biblical parenting, and that's not evidence-based parenting. You can and you must educate desire. You have to inspire your kid to want something more, something better, something higher, something deeper than social media and video games. And I've been a student of biblical Hebrew all my life, and I'm very, very proud that my daughter, who's a senior in high school, has inherited that desire, and she is really on fire to study biblical Hebrew. And at the risk of boasting, that's kind of what I mean by educating desire. No one is born with a desire to study biblical Hebrew. You have to teach them that look at all the riches there are in the Hebrew Bible. You're going to have to work hard to understand that, to get to the point where you can grasp that. But there's great riches there to be unearthed if you are willing to work hard to inspire that, educate desire. Yeah. And the way you do that is to share things that you love, share what you have learned as a parent, and then inspire that love in your kid. And that's the chapter in the new edition. It's titled Joy.
Yeah, it was really convicting just hearing how you were saying, hey, if you don't have self-control, how do you expect your child to have self-control? If you don't have desires.
You cannot teach a virtue which you yourself do not possess. In order to become a better parent, you have to become a better person.
Yeah, I mean,
there's no shortcut.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to sum this all up. Dr. Sax, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. Where can people best find you, your resources, and what is it that you're currently doing?
Go to my website, leonardsax.com, leonardsax.com, and you can also find my email and where I'll be speaking next, and hopefully come to one of my events and we can meet.
That would be awesome.
That would be awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks again.